Before we start talking about what kind of future we could have, let's look at the past. Anybody who knows me personally can tell you that I'm a real history buff. So, in February 28, 1892, Rudolf Diesel patented his diesel engine, and the prototypes were built to run on peanut or vegetable oil. So essentially most of what he wanted his diesels to run on was peanut oil or vegetable oil. And keep in mind, they did have oil. They did have crude oil back then. They also had cars for about 6 to 7 years before he did this. Now, on September 29th, 1913, he just vanishes. He falls off a ship. Nobody knows what happened. On October 10th, sailors picked up his body floating in the water. It was officially deemed a suicide. Obviously, conspiracy theories began to fly immediately, murdered by agents from Big Oil. But at the time, by 1912, there were more than 70,000 diesel engines working around the world. The reason he invented the diesel engine was because steam engines of the time, which wasted more than 90% of their fuel energy, whereas the diesel engine only wasted about 26%. Go figure. Now, I don't know why anybody would think that, agents of Big Oil would murder this guy. Obviously, he had such a crappy life and he was such a loser that he must have committed suicide. I mean, that's the only explanation I see. Now, back in the early 1900s, it wasn't just vegetable oil and peanut oil, but also alcohol fuels were very competitive with gasoline. Even Henry Ford, in 1908, he made his Model T. He introduced his Model T to run on alcohol fuels just as well as traditional gasoline. And his Model Ts and his cars would actually run on alcohol fuels right up until the repeal of Prohibition in 1933. And Prohibition said that you couldn't make grain alcohol or moonshine, which was essentially what alcohol fuel was. I mean, you could still go and drink ethanol and get drunk off of it. So essentially that's what alcohol fuel is. It's moonshine. And back then, in the early 1900s, it had a real competition for gasoline. But we all know who won that competition. I like this here where it says, Spiritus Locomotable. So, there's more proof that spirits used to drive our automobiles. Now, everybody knows who Nikola Tesla is. He's been kind of popping back up in pop culture. In fact, I'm ashamed to say, but I didn't know who Nikola Tesla was until 2008, 2009, and a lot of my friends really couldn't believe it. He developed an idea for smartphone technology back in 1901. I didn't know this, but I got it off the pbs.org website. He also developed the free energy tower. Everybody knows about this, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. And everybody knows who shut him down. It was this guy. His name's J.P. Morgan. Now let's talk about a free energy device that I'm really excited about. And it's this magnetic motor. And I know that all electrical motors are magnetic, but this is 2 permanent magnet motors that operates a perpetual motion machine. And I know some people don't think perpetual motion machines exist, but Leonardo da Vinci back in the late 1400s developed one that looked like this. I'm not saying that this is a very efficient design, because you would have to have something very big of this design to power even a small house. Now let's imagine for a moment that the idea of a perpetual motion machine or free energy is as ludicrous as mainstream scholars would have us believe. There's still other technologies out there. This is off the NASA website, and this is talking about bioalgae. And it talks about how it grows algae and it cleans wastewater, captures carbon dioxide, and ultimately produces biofuels. So if you're worried about the earth and climate change, we could reverse all of that just by growing bioalgae. And this is not anything that science would debate at all. Bioalgae takes CO2 from the air and it recycles it into oil. And that oil then becomes what they call carbon neutral, because the oil that you're putting back into the atmosphere is the exact same oil you took out of the atmosphere when you were creating the algae in the first place. So with bioalgae, we could clean our water, produce fuel for ourselves, and if we wanted to reverse climate change without geoengineering, we could trap carbons into biofuels and then pump that oil back into the oil fields in which we released all of the carbons that created the climate change that we have today. Now, back in the late 70s, an inventor called Yule Brown invented something called Brown's gas, which was really just electrolysis, and he hooked it up to a carburetor, and he started getting much more fuel-efficient mileage for his car. And so what it does is it takes an electrical current, runs through water, and separates the water into hydrogen, oxygen gas. And both hydrogen and oxygen are extremely combustible. Here on this Wikipedia page, it talks about fringe science and how the H2O2 gases don't really work in vehicles and automobiles to get them more fuel-efficient miles per gallon. And it has this Popular Mechanics article to support their claims. But when I Googled it with a quick Google search, I found this article. And right down here, it says that it will improve the fuel economy anywhere from 15 to 300%. And it's also talking about this is how they make the water cars that everybody's been hearing about. Now, don't you find it kind of interesting that every couple of years they come out and they say, oh, these new inventors got a new water car, and then you never see it on the market? Now, we've been talking a lot about fuels for our vehicles and maybe our homes at one point, and this is without using solar power or wind power technology. One thing that people complain about solar power is that it's only there when the sun's out, and when the sun's gone, there's no medium to store it with, no effective medium to store it with. Now, when you use bioalgae, that takes that whole problem out of the window, because bioalgae is that medium storage of fuel, and you can use it whenever you want, whether the sun's shining or not. But let's talk about the original fuel, and that would be food and food production, because that's the fuel that we need to run our bodies. And back in the day, that's the fuels that you needed to run your horses or your oxen or whatever, you know, the old tractors used to be, which would be a horse or an oxen. So let's see what type of food technology we have today. And you can see that we have vertical growing farms, and this is way more efficient, can produce way more fuel per foot than the large agriculture planning that we have today. Here are some aquaponics, and the idea of this is that the fish waste feed the plants, and the plant waste feed the fish. It's a pretty effective way of growing food and feeding people. And in fact, you can feed one adult male with 25 square feet of space, and that is just a small room. It probably takes a lot more than 25 square feet to feed one adult male when you're using big agriculture planning. Now, I'll leave some links below for everything that I've talked about today. I hope that you look into them and that you research them on your own and with your own time. Now, let's take a moment to talk about why we do not do these things today in society, and it all has to do with false profit. The people who run this world and the people who create the money, they give us paper or little numbers on a computer screen for us giving them our labor and the real profits and the real fruits of this planet, in which they use in order to destroy the planet that we all inhabit together. So please think about these things when you're thinking about your children's future and their children's future. I have myself gotten to the point where I will no longer accept the things I cannot change. I am trying to change the things that I cannot accept. And I hope at least the people who are watching these videos are right there along the same train of thought with me. Thank you and stay tuned.